I need your help giving a gift. And we'll get to that in a second, but let's talk about imagery first. So, our words are rooted in imagery. We are describing something we see externally and internally. When somebody says, I saw him jazzercising, what they're saying is I, a person, saw a moment in time, him, a pronoun of somebody else, jazzercising, an exercise involving ridiculous movements that causes you to sweat and lose some lbs. It's great. So when we get to our beliefs are rooted in words, which is rooted in imagery. If you grew up in a Protestant tradition, you really don't have any imagery at all, so you've never really thought about how your beliefs are informed by imagery. But just do this exercise. Imagine heaven in your head, if you can. Now, if we could see in your head, and we could see everybody else who was imagining heaven, after the initial shock and horror of what we'd find in each other's heads, what we would see is very different ideas or images, but the same ideas, the similar ones that we'd see in each other's heads, I bet you cold, hard cash, are not informed by the Bible or scripture, because that's words, but are informed by caricatures and cartoons and paintings and movie clips that we've seen throughout our lives. These images have become the rootedness in what and how we describe what our beliefs are. What happens when we don't have any imagery tied to our beliefs is we become a culture of word policing. We say things a certain way so we all know we're on the same team. But if somebody else comes along and says things differently, we're like, hey, you're not saying that the same way I do. And so we're like, we're not connected. They might be describing the same things we're seeing, but just in different language. The second thing about imagery is that a great question when you see a piece of art is, what does this mean? Another great question to ask it is, what is this bringing out of you? Because one of the functions of imagery is that it's an excavation tool. It's retrieving an inner conversation in you and pulling it out to the surface. And that's important because we need to know that inner conversation with us. That's how we're healed, when we can see our own story, where we can see where we're actually at. It allows us to interact with the divine. For over a decade, I've been working with faith communities and developing a visual language for their faith journeys. And I've made a lot of imagery. Made imagery on Advent and Lent and ordinary time, on certain spiritual rhythms and calendar seasons and different subject matters. And here's a couple things that I've noticed. One, with this large catalog of work, I get contacted like every week by some church saying, can I use this image? Can we use this image as part of our spiritual formation when we gather together on Sunday? There's this hunger for imagery. The second thing I've noticed is that for most of my career, my art space has been in a church building. In attics and back rooms, I've created a space and I've worked with communities in developing a visual language for the faith journey they're on. And then I've been given this wonderful place, which is in my backyard, and it's fantastic and I love it. But I remember asking the giver, I said, what's happening? Like, am I no longer involved in a certain community? Why is my workspace no longer in a church? And on a beach in Corpus Christi by myself, enjoying the waves, I got the download. And it was this word, which is, you're no longer going to be sponsored by one church, but you're going to be sponsored by the church to create a visual language for all. So here's the gift we're going to create. We're going to create a liturgical visual catalog for the ecumenical and global church to use. A free resource that follows the liturgical calendar, all the seasons, all the movements, all the rhythms, and give an image alongside the word and music that's already been created. This will be used for spiritual formation, for worship, for response, for prayer, for contemplation, all the things that are going to be happening in a community as we use these things to help us connect with the giver. And I'm going to follow the rhythms of the liturgical year and the liturgical calendar and develop an image for each week and eventually an image for every day. Admittingly, it's going to take a few years to figure out the structure and the platform and all the imagery. But it's also going to involve research and to develop a visual language that contextually makes sense. After a pop and digital art movements, after moving away from a Eurocentric depiction of all these things into a more globally inclusive expression of a visual faith. And I'm not afraid to say it, and I humbly say it, but I'm that person. I'm that person who's been doing this and needs a team and a community to help me do it. So I'm asking for your involvement. I can't do this alone. I need help from a community that can financially support me to say yes to this project, when I usually have to say yes to all these other things that just help me survive as an artist and a person who takes care of a family. By supporting this work, you get access to all the imagery as it's being made. You're also invited into the dialogue that's going to be happening on what kind of things, like problems we come across and things we need to solve. And at the end, you'll be a part of the church that helped bring this gift to everyone else. So let's do this thing. Click and support in whatever way you can. And I need your help giving this gift.